welcome to our listeners and a warm welcome to Mr. Daniel Steinman. If you know what I mean, it is that time. Econo Chat, Let's Talk Business with Mr. Daniel Steinman. I'm your hostess, and we will be talking something interesting today. We're talking about water. The question is, why water? How is water related to the economy? Well, Mr. Daniel Steinman will dive into it. We're also going to touch on climate change, how climate change is related. And then there's something interesting that I just saw, and that is water inflation. I've never heard of that. But a warm welcome to you, Mr. Daniel Steinman.
Thank you, Elsabe. And may I introduce you to the listeners, because you forgot to mention your own name. Elsabe Tebanyani.
Yes. So, Mr. Daniel Steinman, you came up with water. We just recently finished with the COP28 summit in regards to climate change. But we will talk about that later on. But first, tell us, why did you choose to talk about water?
Elsabe, can you recall about 6 or 7 months ago, I also talked about water.
Rainfall.
Rainfall, yes, as an economic input or determinant is a nice word in Namibia. And I just quickly, 1 minute, I have to repeat that assertion that I made then. And that is that the most important economic element in Namibia is water. And now, always when I say this, even for an educated audience, when I do a presentation where there are a couple of dozen economists and educated people in the audience, they always ask me, why do you say this water? I mean, we must just make the water, prepare it. Or
easier said than done.
Do something with it so that we can use it. Namibia is the driest country in sub-Saharan Africa. Even drier than countries in the so-called Sahel, which is just south of the Sahara. We are, doesn't matter where we are. If you go between Rundu and Divundu, I think there's a small spot there that, if you look at it over many years, they maybe get 600 millimeters rainfall in some years, but not consistently. We are in the rainfall zone below 550 millimeters a year, which is dry savanna. Although it doesn't look like that when you drive through the Mangu in February and March, but it's still a dry place. But most of the country is in the 350 millimeter zone. And then if you go into the desert, it's 150 millimeter or less. So it's from arid to hyper-arid. Now, if I take us 30 years back, I think we were 1.2 million people. Now today, we've doubled. I think we are now about 2.4, 2.5.
2.4, yeah.
I'm anxiously waiting for the final results of the latest census, but that will take a couple of more months to be processed. But let's say, for argument's sake, there are now 2.5 million people. It's still the same Namibia. The whole implication, the thing you have to realize, it's with still the limited water resources. So the whole thing about climate change is that we are flying blind. We can see the impact. We can see when it floods in June, something that has never happened in the past. We can see 1 year in the north, before the Ifunja comes, everything in certain areas is underwater, the roads are washed away, it's a flood, and then 8 months later or 6 months later, when the mango harvest is supposed to start, then it's a drought. And the people, they've planted mango in October, beginning of November, waited. Everything went well until about January. Come February, March, April, the plants just wilt. And if they do make seeds, those are very small. I've actually been shown what does a good, healthy mango plant produce, and a drought mango. If the pips are very small, basically unusable. So these are the extremes. And we are reasonably convinced that they are the result of climate change, and the whole concept of climate change is captured in that name, climate change. It is,
but it's still difficult for people to
changing.
understand that.
Yes, but
what climate change really is, but we see it all around us.
This
every
is
day.
the whole thing about flying blind. We see the effect, but we don't know where we're going because we don't know how severe it's going to get.
Yes.
And Namibia, this is the whole point. Namibia, that is already an arid and a hyper-arid country, is 10 times more affected by it than other countries. You know, if you only get 50 millimeters of rain in a year, or even every 2 years, like in the Namib, it's very little. But you are very dependent on that 50 millimeters. If what has happened for the past 7 years, before this year, that you in the south, I'm talking about in the Spergebied, the Kaigap, the new national park there. For 7 years, zero. No, nothing. I mean, how do you survive? And there aren't many people there. There's nobody in the Spergebied. The people are in Ludres, Oranjemund, Rospina, and in Aus, the four corners of the area. But we've got very big plans. This is the heartland of our green hydrogen dreams. But we don't know what the outcome will be. This is what makes it so difficult, so unpredictable. So when you don't have any idea what the outcome will be, you can't budget. Because if you want to budget to mitigate a certain chain of events, you have to have a fair idea of how they will evolve eventually. You know? And this is what I want to talk about in the second part of our talk when we come back just now, is that the whole problem with climate change is that it's never consistent. So that uncertainty, that you don't know what you're dealing with, that leads to what we see, either too much or too little.
Too much or too little? That is what we will talk about right after this short break.